Hi, this is Nick Dawson from Talkhouse, and you're listening to the latest episode of the Talkhouse Podcast news spin-off series, Nobody's Ever Asked Me That. Each episode, I talk to a filmmaker, musician, or writer, and aim to ask them questions they've never heard before in an interview, in an effort to discover a different side of them and understand them better. The guest on today's episode is Griffin Dunne, and a lot of the questions I asked Griffin from my Nobody's Ever Asked Me That master list were focused on self-reflection, death, and regret. I'll explain why in just a little bit. As for the reason I was talking to Dunne, he is currently starring in writer-director Noah Pritzker's poignant and beautifully rendered family drama Ex-Husbands, opposite James Norton, Miles Heiser, and Rosanna Arquette. The film is out now on digital and is highly recommended. I was excited to sit down with Dunne, as some years back, I set up a Talkhouse Podcast conversation between him and the Australian actor-turned-writer-director Simon Baker, and was struck by Dunne's wisdom and generosity as a conversationalist. He'd also just directed a documentary portrait of his aunt, Joan Didion, The Centre Will Not Hold, which added a new facet to his already diverse creative resume. Dunne has always been hard to pin down. He is, of course, a veteran actor, best known for After Hours and American Werewolf in London and countless other movies and TV shows. He's also the director of Hollywood movies such as Practical Magic and Addicted to Love, and the producer of indie classics like Joan Micklin Silver's Chilly Scenes of Winter and John Sayles' Baby It's You. What's more, Dunne also comes from literary roots. Not only was Joan Didion his aunt, but his father was the novelist and Vanity Fair reporter Dominic Dunne, and his uncle, the journalist, novelist, and screenwriter John Gregory Dunne. In 2024, Dunne published a memoir, The Friday Afternoon Club, which looks back on his family and their often dark and difficult history. Beautifully written, it is as unwaveringly honest as the work of his eminent relatives. The book readily, and sometimes even gleefully, embraces the aspects of his family's past that most people would choose to withhold, deftly balancing light and dark as it tackles addiction, divorce, and sexuality head-on. The biggest motif in The Friday Afternoon Club, though, is death, with the latter part of the book dominated by the tragic murder of Dunne's younger sister Dominique and its incredibly painful aftermath. Reading The Friday Afternoon Club gave me a deep insight into Dunne, but maybe predictably, learning so much about him only led to more questions. In our conversation, we talked about uncertainty, mortality, the complex nature of grief, driving cross-country at times of great change, that time he scared the living daylights out of Neil Simon, my idea for a secret 8th day of the week, how Chekhov changed the course of Dunne's life and career, and much more. At what age did you first feel like a confident adult?
Maybe 15 minutes ago.
Okay.
And then, it kind of comes and goes. Sometimes I will, when I finish the book that I wrote, there was a memoir about my family.
Yeah.
It was about my experience all the way through. And one of the things I thought was like, oh my God, look, I have done a great deal. And I did have a certain confidence. And I remember waiting for the elevator with my dog in my apartment in East Village. I kind of thought, God, I'm the kind of guy I wanted to be when I was younger. And I've got this great dog in this really nice building, and I've done really good work, and I'm a dad. And I'm like somebody I would have thought was pretty cool when I was younger.
Yeah.
And that lasts for however long that lasts. And then I get on a plane and I'll go to promote a movie I'm very proud of that we'll be talking about. But then it's Oscar weekend and I don't have anything nominated. And I'm going to these Hollywood parties with people doing, huge projects that I'm not in. And it's like suddenly I'm in high school with all the same feelings that I had, being the nerd in school. So, it's an evolving process. It never lands where it is. We're all works in progress.
So you were mentioning high school. It's one of the things I was sort of intrigued to ask you. Like sometimes I will default to feeling like a sort of 17-year-old who's outmatched by the world, who's just like not ready. Was there an age that you feel you are inside, or a certain place that you land?
Well, certainly, I'm going to be 70 in June,
Mm-hmm.
and I feel a hell of a lot younger than that. That makes no sense to me. But the age that you're talking about, that high school age, is really it's universal. It's one of the reasons I left Los Angeles to come to New York, because the expression that really brought me here was L.A. and Hollywood is high school, New York is college, university.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was back for this Oscar weekend, it doesn't matter how famous you are, how much money you have, how many awards you have made. When you're sitting in a restaurant, you are saying, am I at the right table? And how come did they get a reservation before me? And am I invited to this? And people can pretend they don't think that, but everyone is thinking that.
And that's how your dad thought as well, right?
Yeah, everyone. It's a very adolescent way of thinking that people in the Polo Lounge at the Beverly Hills Hotel who are in their 70s are thinking just as much as a new kid on the block in their 20s.
Yeah. You mentioned or sort of alluded to Ex-Husbands, the film that is sort of the reason for us talking today. That film is so much about family, as is your book. And I was thinking when I was reading your book about the way in which coming from a notable family, a famous family, a family where people had distinguished themselves, and the way that you approached your life and establishing yourself. And Noah Pritzker, who I had lunch with 10 years ago, who's a talented, really interesting young guy, also comes from a notable family in a way, and is taking the same path of trying to establish himself on his own terms. So I'm intrigued to know about the kinship that you felt with that project and with your dual path in a way.
Yeah, I was not aware when Noah approached me, particularly of his family. I actually had heard of the Pritzkers. He had, I guess, an aunt named Gigi Pritzker who was involved in financing movies that I had dealt with as a producer in the 80s at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But I was taking the central character that he asked me to play was a father of two grown men, boys, I call them, all the way through, who are having their struggles, and I am having my struggles going my character through a divorce. And my father had recently died. And when I met with Noah, I was shocked at how young he was. To know that his protagonist would feel all of these emotions that I was well aware of, that I had approached in the course of life, with the loss of my parents and a divorce here and there, and being the father of, in my case, a grown daughter. So I was kind of like, how does he know this? The inner life of this guy. It was very, very true. He's what we would call an old soul.
I think that's very true. And going back to what we were talking about, sort of feeling like a high school kid and worrying about how high in the pecking order you are when you go to Chasen's or whatever. At this point, for you, how much of the time are you still thinking about trying to prove yourself to people? How much does it feel like you have to prove yourself to people, or people are trying to prove themselves to you?
I think, at this point, it's less about proving yourself of having that be a motivation. It's more like, will I be allowed to do good work that I can be proud of, that my peers and an audience will respond to? Will I still be creative and relevant? I kind of don't feel I have to prove anything. I just want to still be in the game of doing work that is exciting to me and entertaining to others. A lot of people can have a career and but hits a certain bump, and then they're not allowed to do that. Just age, culture, shift. However, I'm old enough and have been around long enough to be incredibly grateful that I am able to work and talk to you and say things that hopefully are interesting to other people. A lot of people fall by the wayside, and it's a real privilege to be able to still make a living doing this.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk in a sort of self-deprecating way in the book about the paths that you didn't take, or the way in which you self-sabotaged at certain points in your career. Are you somebody who thinks about the paths not taken and why it was that you made certain decisions that you made?
Yeah, that was a process I dived into in my memory as I was writing it, almost in real time, just reliving paths not taken, regrets, things that I had revisiting things that I had punished myself for, choosing to produce a movie I wasn't in, to be behind the camera at a point where other people wanted me in front of the camera,
Mm-hmm.
to be a movie star or not a movie star. And, these decisions were sort of by insecurity or fear.
Mm-hmm.
And success, I think, did in your 20s. When it comes very fast. And there are reasons certain young people have been flamed out and turned to drugs and really blown it when the white heat is on you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that always sort of scared me. And I always had the other side of my brain to work, which was producing and
Mm-hmm.
and working with some of America's greatest directors and learning from them. But at the time, I would also kind of kick myself, and I would frustrate my acting agents a great deal.
Mm-hmm.
But, when I finished the book and I looked at my life in totem, I looked at all the things I had done and the directors I had worked with as
Mm-hmm.
both an actor and a producer, Sidney Lumet and Martin Scorsese and Lasse Hallström, just went on and on. I thought, God, I've done a lot. This never would have happened if I was just focusing on one thing as an actor.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was just an actor, not that there's anything wrong with just being an actor, but I would run the risk of limiting myself to one profession and knowing more about that one profession, but also falling out of vogue as an actor doing that one thing. I mean, this way I've just sort of paced it out, and I'd be able to play the young love interest and then age into playing the Supreme Court judge.
Yeah.
So I'm still able to do it. People haven't gotten sick of me. So it turned out to be a good thing. And I forgave myself and actually was quite proud of myself.
That's great. One of the things that really struck me about the book is the level of self-examination and self-knowledge. And one of the things that I've been meaning to do for a while is to learn more about my mother, who passed away a number of years ago, because she was kind of the primary person in my life for a long time and had a very complex past, and her parents had a complex past that is still somewhat cloudy to me. There's so much rich detail in the book about almost all of your family members, in the darkness and the light. In writing the book, did you gain a greater understanding of yourself and the place that certain things came from, or your place in the world in some sense, your inner self?
Yes. And I would encourage you to really do a deep dive into your mother's past as much as you can find out, and let that lead to your grandparents, because I always suspected, but once I was writing, I really kind of leaned into the idea of a genetic behavior that is passed down. And on both sides, my mother's side was Hispanic, was Mexican, and my father's side was Irish Catholic, both sides Catholic. And there was recklessness on my mother's side that began generations before, of infidelity and booze, but made for great stories that would be passed down, of, having a great grandfather who died of a heart attack with his mistress on a boat, and they get the mistress out, and then his employees call the wife to say, "Oh, your husband is dead. He died in his sleep, peacefully in his sleep." And she turns to her lover and says, "Let's go to the funeral together. We'll get married in the morning. We can go to the funeral."
Yeah.
What kind of family is that? I understand that family. I'm from that family. And, all sorts of behavior that happened on my father's side of the family that was very wrapped up in being Irish and being Catholic, and alcohol that went with that, and really dark, funny humor that went with that, but also a great deal of shame and secrets. And so when you look at the family tree and think of it in terms of behavior, you can sort of say, "Oh, I see where I got that. Oh, that's where that resentment comes from. Oh, so go at it.
Yeah.
Dive in there."
Yeah. The book reads so well, and one of the things that struck me about it is your willingness to share things that many people would consider unthinkable in many ways. And I was wondering how much you had to push yourself or self-examine to find the line between what should be shared and what shouldn't be.
Well, I had a sort of a marching order. If I was going to write this book, I first had to get permission from my brother, who's really the only immediate family member still alive. And he had his struggles decades earlier with mental illness. And I couldn't tell the story without telling, his entire life, childhood and everything. And his marching order to me was, you could say whatever you want about me, just have it come from a place of love. And I realized that was my order for everyone I wrote about in the family.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew what my motivation were. I knew there was always love there, even if I was talking about the darkest points of their lives, any of their regrets, any of that. Because I also knew their ending, that they were remarkable people who would be leaving a mark on the world. And I also learned a great deal. Both my father, uncle, and aunt, aunt being Joan Didion, uncle
Mm-hmm.
being John Gregory Dunne, they wrote very harshly and truthfully about themselves. I mean, when my aunt was going to divorce my uncle,
Mm-hmm.
she made an essay out of it, and my uncle edited it. So they were being blunt about where one is in life and about one's past. I really picked that up from my parents. My father would write about his alcoholism and the embarrassment of, he had very shallow years, where his priorities were very much involved in chasing celebrity and materialism and keeping secrets and shame. That's just what he wrote about when he got sober.
Mm-hmm. Can we talk a little bit about death? Because death is so central to the book. And you write from the nanny who died, whose body you discovered, to obviously your sister's murder. You write about it in a very candid, clear-eyed way. I was wondering how sort of the presence that it's had in your life has shifted the way that you think about mortality for yourself.
Well, death has always been, from a really early age, I think this comes from being the Irish side of the family, has always been a source of real humor. Maybe that's a deflection to sort of keep it off. As a child, my father told me stories about when his father died, they would have open casket funerals and people would come over and they'd have pennies on the eyes and he'd see his father in there. And he told a funny story about his mother wanting to have his father stuffed and put in his favorite chair. And I just thought that was the funniest story I ever heard. And then when I told my dad when I was 5 years old, I wanted to drive his car, he said, listen, kid, when I cool, you can keep the car and you can drive it. And if I die behind the wheel, just get us home. And about a week later, he died behind the wheel in a fake heart attack. And I grabbed the wheel and I drove it. And it was one of the most exciting, funniest things I ever did. And so we've always had a relationship. And in the case of what you just mentioned, around that same time, I had a nanny. She was elderly, named Mrs. Leasing. And she died sitting on the toilet, I presume, because, I came in to do a tinkle into the bathroom and she was on the floor with her girdle around her ankles. And I stepped over her and went tinkle. I was a sit down peer. And then went and announced to my parents that Mrs. Leasing's on the bathroom floor and she has strawberry jam all over her mouth, which of course was blood and it knocked out her teeth. So there's been a lot of death, a relationship to death from a very early age. And as you said, it led to the most unthinkable death that, with the murder of my sister, that there's nothing, you can't find anything, dark humor in that, but it was so painful. The trial that followed for the killer was such a travesty that our family would find moments that would make us cry with laughter.
Yeah.
That was what got us through it. Somebody saying something so out of left field, so maybe inappropriate in the face of a situation that fills you with such rage, such anger, such loss and grief, and then still be willing to just go into hysterical laughter
Yeah.
in the blink of an eye. And I think that's why my family survived all of that. So it turned out to be a gift.
Reading the scene that you wrote about the lunch that you had on that worst day of the trial when a story led your family to sort of be in hysterics reminded me of a moment when my sister and I were with some relatives at a pub after my mother's funeral. And something that we said, again, made us laugh a lot. And I felt like it was profoundly misunderstood by the people around us because they were like, oh, this is, they're not that sad. Like, how could they be? They're laughing.
Yeah.
Whereas that coexistence of profound, inexpressible pain and grief, along with the human need to find some chink of hope or humor or life, I thought you expressed it beautifully.
Well, I think that, yeah. And, you know, people who have not experienced real grief, and I hope they never do, but they have an impression of what it looks like based on, you know, movies of the week. So they don't have the profound understanding you just described. When you say pub, you mean England or Ireland?
I was born and raised in Scotland.
Oh, Scotland.
My accent does not betray that, but
Oh, I couldn't. I was trying to place it, bro, this whole time.
Yeah, it's a generic mid-Atlantic accent at the moment, which I have to settle for. I have so many questions for you, but let me see what I think is the most important next question. How do you cope with uncertainty?
Most of the time, quite poorly. So I hope this isn't an advice column show.
No, it's not.
I don't know what I could teach you or share my great wisdom. I cope with uncertainty by trying to quell the voices, quell the anxiety. I try to not be one of those, if I'm with someone who is close to me, I try to sound measured. If I want to express it and not sound like, you know, one of the men on the Titanic that's pushing the women out of the lifeboat, you know, I know in moments of uncertainty, it's an absolute waste of time to be in the present moment and worrying about the future because you can't do anything about it. I know about, you know, letting go. I know about just staying in the moment, which is more important than the time wasted worrying about the future, which isn't going to look like the way you plan it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I know all those things. So I just try to not have a physical reaction to it.
Yeah.
But, you know, everything is I'll have about 4 uncertain moments today by dinner.
It's about the same on this end, I would say, or I'm not going to get competitive with you, but it's about the same.
Oh, you can, I'd gladly have you win that one.
Okay, that's fine. Are there building blocks of your life that create stability and structure that help keep uncertainty at bay? Or those other bothersome emotions?
I can keep uncertainty bay. If I just keep my focus, I've always got something to do. I've always got something to write, something to develop. I've got a very active work life.
Mm-hmm.
The worst kind of uncertainty I can have is having nothing to work on and having no one want me to work on anything. So I keep that at bay. That keeps me very, very stable. If there's anything that's like uncertain is when I let it, I take on too much and I'm trying to do catch up to it. But I'm a big list maker. I mean, all around here, it's just lists of things that I have to accomplish. So I always have the feeling I'm a little bit behind on everything. But I'll take that feeling over having really nothing in front of me. That's a far bigger worry for me to have.
Yeah. And do you feel like the work that you do you see a common thread? Do you know the things that draw you to projects beyond the basic things, like they're well written? Do you see connective tissue between, say, the films that you have directed or the films that you're drawn to as a producer?
Yeah, it's never conscious. But when I look back at finding a common thread, I always used to think I would like to be the kind of actor and director like Billy Wilder who could do every kind of genre you could imagine. Yeah. And that always looked like so much fun to me. I don't think I possess that talent. I think I have, but then I look at the sum of work and I think in there's heart. There's always kind of romance. There's usual irony, hopefully humor. And that's become out more and more as I got older and in both acting and directing. Of late, I've done more documentary, but there's usually, you know, I went to acting school when I was young and we would always be doing these plays of Anton Chekhov. And I would always overact in them all the time. And I never quite understood them, but I could never admit that. And then sometime in my late 50s, early 60s, I was burning out on acting because there was no common thread. I wasn't sure what I was doing. I was hitting a moment of uncertainty, as we were talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And somebody told me about a class taught by the man who ran the Moscow Arts Theater, where Stanislavski was once a teacher, that specializes in the works of Anton Chekhov. And I thought, oh, okay, I'd like to take that. And there was this teacher. He didn't speak a word of English. He had an interpreter. And suddenly I was playing a character named Ivanov. And my God, I understood this. I understood Chekhov so completely. I went, oh my God, this is what I've been working toward. This guy is hilarious, this character. And his writing, Chekhov's writing, it's hilarious. It's tragic. It's pathetic. And you can only understand it by living and getting the shit kicked out of you and having your heart broken and drinking too much and making huge mistakes. And I think that became a turning point in my life with in another direction of still keeping the heart and the love and all those things, but kind of taking it to another level. And it led, as life can happen, you put out a certain vibe, and suddenly I'm asked to play this character in This Is Us, which is a very popular network show, a character called Uncle Nicky, who is suicidal, an alcoholic, heartbroken. And I just done this Chekhov workshop where I played this guy.
Yeah.
And I went, isn't that amazing? And it was a part I was really, really proud of because it had all of those things. And then redemption through love of family. And that's sort of the phase I'm in now, of all the things that were the lessons and mistakes and minor triumphs of a younger man, applying them now in my work. But the thing that's always at the center of it is love, and, love of family and love of life and opportunity and love for new experience.
That's interesting. One of the questions I've written down that I'm always intrigued to ask people, you're actually the first person I've asked this to, though, is if you had a week when you had no commitments to anything or anybody, you could go wherever you wanted, or where would you go and what would you do?
Well, I don't know this is the answer, but this morning, I have a bookshelf in my hallway, and my girlfriend was in the kitchen and she was making coffee. And I was looking at all the books on my bookshelf, and I realized there were a lot I never got to, and by authors I really loved. And I was like, kind of going, I can't believe I haven't read that. And it's been sitting there for 4 years on this shelf. And there's another one, and there's another one. And I was telling her about the Twilight Zone episode of the man who is the last survivor on Earth after a nuclear blast. And he comes up and he's so happy because now he can just stay and read all the books he wants because he shut himself off from society anyway. So being the last person alive on Earth didn't strike him as lonely at all. He was thrilled about it.
Yeah.
And he could read his books. And he has his glasses, and the glasses fall off his face, and he steps on the glasses. And I just brought that up. So I was going to say I would take those books from my shelf.
Yeah.
I'd like to go somewhere tropical.
Yeah.
One of the Tahitian islands somewhere, or
Sure.
somewhere in the Aeolian Sea. But I'd like to have a lot of books, a lot of writing, and great warm ocean, and just sort of stay fit and just become fecund with all these things to get to and just be in a very creative space. I'd like to have company of, let's say, my girlfriend who was in the kitchen. I'd like to bring her along.
Yeah. That's definitely allowed. Definitely allowed.
Yeah, that's okay.
I have a bookshelf where it's literally organized by, I have not read these yet, and I really have been meaning to for a long time. So for me, I think it would be more than a week to get through them all. But I have this fantasy of like an 8th day of the week that is known only to me, where I can sort of disappear to do all those things that I never get around to.
Oh, that sounds great. I love that idea. I would use that probably for the Criterion channel and just sort of veg out in front of the Or maybe I just get a very big screen and just one of those reclining chairs and just watch all those movies I put in my library to get to and just work my way through noir. And that would be very satisfying to me.
Mm-hmm. As time goes on, I feel so much more drawn to not even necessarily movies that I've seen before, but as you're saying, like noir, classic Hollywood movies, movies that I've sort of inexplicably missed. Do you find yourself as interested in new work as you are in sort of rounding out the canon in terms of your consumption?
Great question. I ask myself that a lot. I ask myself, like, one of the things that I hope will come from the movie that inspired us to talk about Ex-Husbands is Greenwich Releasing is doing a remarkable thing in an effort to bring people back. And I don't know if you to the theaters, to movie theaters. And if you saw the Academy Awards and watched Nora's, Sean Baker's speech of passion, and several people said, let people go back to the theaters and see new works instead of tentpole movies, and bring back that community of movie going and seeing independent movies and people talking movies, all different kinds. So it's my hope that that is going to happen. So watching it, I don't think I have the right perspective on a lot of new movies because I just see them streaming. And,
Right.
If you're seeing The Brutalist on your TV in your living room that has an intermission is an entirely different experience than sitting there looking at an enormous screen and seeing the epicness of it. And so I've been shying away from doing that because I think I'm looking at important work, but yet I'm kind of bored. And like, why am I? Because I'm bored because I'm distracted because there's all this other stuff here. So the only thing that really anchors my attention is the familiar. And when I'm going to look at something is entirely dependable of a noir movie, of seeing Dana Andrews kick the shit out of somebody.
Yeah.
And I'll get lost in the world of the cars and how LA looked in 1948 and the trench coats and the cigarettes. And I will be enormously entertained by the beauty of the past. But I sometimes, what is being made now, it's not grabbing my attention because all I'm doing is seeing it on the screen. And I go, oh, and I'll go, right, here's something that's trying to be really weird. Oh, look, the camera's going upside down and, oh, the colors are all exploding in the, where's the story? And then I end up becoming a farty old guy sitting there. So anyway, a long way of saying, I look forward to reinvigorating my interest in the present, in person, in theaters, in seats.
That's an excellent sentiment. Talking of noir, one of the things, again, that I'm always really interested to know about people, it feels connected to noir in a sort of tangential way. Are you a night person? Is night a staple of your day, as it were?
I certainly was a night person. And then when I became a father, over the course, it's just been drummed out of me having to be up either with an infant or a kid that has to go to school or a lunch you have to make. It's 7:36 in the morning. And so my clock is well past that now. And now I'm at night. If I can't sleep, I sometimes will have periods where I'm insomniac or whatever. And then I will, maybe watch a movie, but I will torment myself. Talk about uncertainty. I'll be like, the later it gets, the more I'm worrying about the next day going, oh, no, I'm going to be tired. I'm going to be tired during this. I'm going to be tired during that. So no, I'm afraid I'm a day guy. I never thought I would be, but here I am.
Yeah. I'm in exactly the same boat. I used to be a night owl, and I'm a father, and I was a father and a night owl for a time, but I don't think it's sustainable.
Are you still married?
I am.
Yeah, good. Well done.
Yeah, I lucked out. My wife is, I married up. Let's just put it that way.
Good. That's the only direction to go.
It is. It's the only way to do it, I think. Can you think of, is there a particular moment of struggle or failure that taught you something that really has stayed with you?
Well, there was actual life-changing failure that happened. I was separating from my wife, the mother of my kid, some decades ago, 30-something years ago. And my acting career wasn't going so great, as one does. It goes ups and downs. And I had an audition that I was requested to be in for a Neil Simon play.
Mm-hmm.
And after the audition, whenever I have a big life-changing, something big in my life happens that I'm not quite sure where it's going to go, like in this case, a separation,
Mm-hmm.
I drive across the country. I've done this several times. I find
Wow.
it very therapeutic to go
Mm-hmm.
from one end, depending on what coast I'm on, to the other. And after this audition, I had intended to get in my car and drive to California. And so I go in and I prepared for this audition for Neil Simon. And I walked in and I saw immediately that the director, I forgot to ask who was directing, had been a director that as a producer, the studio that was making the movie, and I, not personally but had fired him.
Hmm.
And I realized I'd been set up and I prepared a monologue and I got 2 words into it. And he said, "Okay, thank you."
Wow.
And I went, "Oh my God. Oh my God." And you go, "Thank you." And I was sort of shown the door and I was humiliated. And I thought, I'm going to be driving across country instead of thinking about, where I'm going to go in the future of my life. I'm going to be gripping the wheel going, "Yeah, motherfucker, I get for 3,000 miles. I gotta be like this."
Yeah.
And I said, I can't let that happen. And so I got on the other side of the door, it closed, and then I looked back at the doorknob and I threw open the doorknob and I went into the room and I did the entire monologue.
Wow.
And I didn't get one laugh. They were actually stunned. They were just staring at me with their jaws. And I went, okay, had to get that off my chest.
Mm-hmm.
And I walked back and I drove across the country feeling pretty good. Never expecting, of course.
Yeah.
And when I got to like Virginia, I decided to call my agent and I said, "So how'd that go?" And he said, "Well, Neil Simon said it was the scariest moment of his entire life. He thought you had a gun." And no, you're not going to get, I said, "I know I'm not." But the reason I say it was life changing was it sort of taught me, I felt like I took control of an uncontrollable situation. I took control of not about getting the part, but about getting how I would feel about myself when I left. That was up to me. That's the only thing I could control. And while it was a rather extreme example of that, and I wouldn't do that for everything, something inside me changed where I became kind of fearless again. Instead of previously I'd been, "Oh, I hope they like me. I hope they like me. How come I didn't get that part? Oh, I hate you thing. I stink. I suck." This was like, I lost the "I stink. I suck." I felt really kind of good.
Yeah.
And work started to follow.
I love that. I mean, that's an amazing story, but there's this sort of delightful irony to it as well of there's this setup and they have their script of what's going to happen, but you have the script and you stick to the script and scuttle the narrative that they're trying to force you to be in.
That's exactly what I was doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I really like that. And you said you felt this sense of freedom or fearlessness from...
I did. Well, I also felt that I let go a self-loathing and a castigation on my personality and on my talent and on my worth. I didn't let the narrative go to self-blame that I would have if I hadn't gone back in that room. I would have gone, I woulda, shoulda, coulda. How did I let somebody treat me like that? I can't believe I did that. The thing, and I would just, I think the most toxic thing anyone in the creative arts can feel of any painter or musician, is the least creative emotion is bitterness and regret. There's not many songs of interest you can write about bitterness and regret.
Yeah.
And to lug that emotion around, it's very hard to move forward and do good work. And it'll always hold you back. And I somehow on some level knew that. And the only control I had was to make sure that didn't happen.
When you're at those moments where there's the need to drive across country, does the place that you're at in your personal life inevitably bleed into the way that you approach the work?
Yes. And that, it's not so much about driving. I always think it's going to be like driving across country. You start on one coast with a question, a problem that you're going to have solved by the time you get to the other. It is sort of like that, but like, oh, I'm going through a divorce and what's it going to mean? And how are we going to raise my daughter? And how am I going to, move forward? That might get you as far as New Jersey. But then the rest is just, in my case, just keeping myself open for what happens when I get to these towns and who am I listening to? And I'm in a totally different environment. I ended up in a town I ended up going to years later shooting that no one had ever heard of at the time, called Marfa in Texas. And it became a great artistic colony years later. But at this time, it was just this Texan town that looked like the Last Picture Show was shot there. And I had remarkable experiences with these cowboys and people in like an old bar and an old saloon. And I just filled myself up with experiences and life with people who were not in the bi-coastal show business society world that I'd left. I need to fill myself with the people between New York and Los Angeles. So whatever coast I arrived at, having crossed the country, I was just biologically almost different. I'd arrived as a different person. And that's what I was looking for, was a sort of shift in what I knew.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you one more question, if that's okay.
Gotcha.
I'm trying to find the perfect one. How do you make meaning out of your life?
Well, I don't know that I was, that was my goal as I lived my life up to now, but I found meaning in writing about my life. I found my meaning as a son and as a father and as a sibling, and the importance of family, and I guess the preciousness and all those cliches, but definitely the gratitude of, in life. And it's not finding a meaning in life. It's not a question that's tormented me. It's one of those things, as soon as I find it, if there's an answer to that, it's going to change as soon as I answer it.
100%.
It's a moving target. But I did find a meaning when I was writing the book. I felt there was a purpose, there was a meaning. Book is out. I've always got that. So that was my meaning at that point in my life. And it still stays. And it's not a question I hope I torment myself about. I'm okay with the meaning right now.
That's great. Well, the book is amazing. Ex-Husband is out now. It's a fantastic film. Your performance is wonderful as ever. And it's been a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Great talking to you too, Nick. This is really nice.
Thanks so much to Griffin Dunne for talking with me, and thanks to you for listening. Ex-Husbands is now available to stream, and you can buy the Friday Afternoon Club wherever you get your books, which hopefully isn't Amazon. This episode was produced by Myron Kaplan, and the theme music is by The Range. If you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe to the Talkhouse Podcast, and keep your eyes and ears peeled for another of these special Nobody's Ever Asked Me That episodes, including one upcoming with Michel Gondry.